is Dr. Tom Gruber from the National Community Rights Network, and we're here today with three activists from the community rights movement in New Hampshire. We have Michelle Sanborn, who's the state coordinator there in New Hampshire. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here.
And Monica Christofili.
Hi there. I'm happy to be here.
And Monica is our is the New Hampshire Community Rights Network assistant coordinator, and Douglas Darrell. Douglas is our New Hampshire Community Rights Network representative to the National Community Rights Network. He's on the board of directors there with myself. Douglas, welcome.
Welcome, everyone. Have a good, nice afternoon, eh?
We're going to be discussing the National Community Rights Network's endorsement of the New Hampshire Community Rights Network's state amendment campaign for this year, 2018. And we did one previously for the previous attempt at amending the state constitution in New Hampshire, and basically we're going to be talking about the landscape around that and the political landscape around that, and we're going to talk a little bit about why the Constitution needs to be amended in the first place. So welcome, everybody, and why don't we start out with Michelle. Can you tell us a little bit about where you all are at this time with the campaign?
Yes. So at this point in time, the New Hampshire Community Rights Amendment, which has a bill number of CACR 19, which stands for Constitutional Amendment Concurrent Resolution, is getting ready to head into a public committee hearing. The committee that will be hearing that during this legislative year is the House Municipal and County Government Committee. So the purpose of that in New Hampshire is to basically give everybody an opportunity to show up and express their support or opposition for that bill. And then for the committee to make a recommendation to the full House. So that committee's recommendation carries a lot of weight because there's only about, in this case, about 20 people on the committee, and they're making a recommendation to the full House, which consists of 400 members. So at that point, mostly the full House is going to make their decision when it goes to a floor vote based on the committee recommendation. So the committee hearing is key for the opportunity for people to make their voices heard and influence the committee to make a decision that ought to pass, is what we're looking for that amendment to then go forward and be heard by the Senate. And once the Senate hears that, they would have to concur before it would even go to a vote of the people. So New Hampshire is a state where everything that goes for a potential amendment to our Constitution has to go through our legislature. There is no access for citizen petition. So we're, in essence, at the mercy of our legislature as to whether or not we can even vote to amend our Constitution.
Okay. So, Monica, tell us why we need to amend the Constitution.
I would say we need this New Hampshire Community Rights Amendment so that the people's voices can be heard in their own local communities when they want to protect the health, safety, and welfare of their human and natural communities. With our current state preemption and sort of oppression, really, of local people's right to say what they want in their own communities, local government is really being preempted, and that's not working for people at the local level across New Hampshire and really across the country. So here in New Hampshire, we're trying to have our right to local community self-government recognized by this amendment. These rights are already implied by our state constitution, and this amendment would would codify the rights. So we're really excited about this committee hearing that's coming up. It's the chance for the people of New Hampshire to ask their representatives to recognize that these rights are already implied in our Constitution and that it's time for them to be codified.
Thank you. Douglas, so we're wanting to, all over the country, our organization, the National Community Rights Network, what we do is support all these efforts throughout the nation for communities to establish the legal right, the legal recognition of that right to self-govern, to have self-government. So, Douglas, what does that mean to you, that communities need to have the right to self-government? Aren't we already self-governing?
Well, we're supposed to be entitled by our Constitution for self-determination in our communities. And originally, the thought was that behind the Constitution and the communities was that we did have a certain amount of rights, and it's written into the Constitution of New Hampshire already, but it needs to be, well, codified, like that's the word you're using, codified, to strengthen those rights that are already there. And by doing that, we have to eliminate the powers of the corporations that through the permitting process of the states give them equal protection like they are the state making law over us as the citizens. And I think that's about the same as saying that there's a special class of citizens over the rest of us, and that is constitutionally not right. And so the idea of this amendment is to strengthen the original rights of communities' self-determination. This is not a home rule bill, which comes up quite a bit. It's a misunderstanding. This has to do with what we've already been guaranteed in our state constitution, and to bring it forward again into the eyes of the people so they could realize that we're at a time now in the stage of our government, in the way we do things, that it's our civic responsibility to take control of things in our own communities, not controlling over other people, because this does not eliminate our rights. It only strengthens them as our people, but it actually brings to our attention that we have a responsibility and our civic duty to know what's going on in our communities. And when it comes to our health, safety, and welfare, it's important that we are part of that decision-making process, not just going to hearings to be heard of what we feel about this. This is what we know is the constitutional fact, and we need the amendment to bring that forward, because this is not the Wild West or the Wild East anymore. This is a civilized world, and this is the way we do it. We have to go to the courts, whether it be the general court, and if it's challenged by the judiciary, we have to go to the judiciary court, where this can be worked out and solved. That's the civilized way of doing it.
So, Michelle, can you talk a little bit about why the people of New Hampshire really need to have the legal right to self-government?
Yeah, definitely. So New Hampshire is considered what is understood to be a Dillon's Rule state, meaning that the state is the parent, the municipality is the child. And when I refer to the municipality, we're talking about that public corporate entity that represents what we call our community. So as individuals, we live in a town, and that town is considered a municipality, which is a form of a corporation that is considered subordinate to the state. So in essence, Dillon's Rule is saying that your municipality, the place in which you live, where you collectively come together and attempt to make decisions in the best interest of your community, which includes the people and the natural environment, you're denied the ability to really enact or pass anything that offers greater protections than the state, unless the state says that you can. And so in a Dillon's Rule state, clearly, if the state does not say that you can pass a law that offers some greater protections than the state, then it's assumed that you cannot. So that's where we stand politically, judicially, in the perspective on local control, if you will, or self-determination in the state of New Hampshire. So even though our Bill of Rights affirms these kinds of rights where we talk about government, the origin of government is the people, that all power is inherent in the people, that we have the right to change our form of government, and that all of our elected officials are at all times accountable to us. All these kinds of great languages in the New Hampshire State Constitution, because of state statutes and because of the judicial system, these kinds of rights are really not being respected. They're clearly not being recognized in a manner that is allowing communities to then be able to apply them in governing decisions in the places where they live. So the bottom line is that we are denied the right to self-determination or the right to local self-government in our communities. And so the purpose of the amendment is to specifically enumerate that right so that it's clear when corporations and governmental entities attempt to use Dillon's rule theory, or when they attempt to use preemption to then, take a state level law to overturn the local will of the people, that would not be allowed. The amendment would put a stop to that and make it clear that when it comes to protecting the health, safety, and welfare of people in their communities, that this kind of preemptive override of the local will, or this concept of Dillon's rule, where the municipality doesn't have a recognized authority to enact a greater protection than the state, clearly is not the intent of governing process in the state of New Hampshire. So that's what we hope to achieve, or that's what the amendment would achieve, and what the people of New Hampshire are hoping for is a recognition of that by the general court, by other supportive organizations, and of course clearly by the people of New Hampshire. It would be a process of, in essence, changing very significantly the way in which local communities have a recognized governing authority in the places where they live. So it's an individual right, but it's also a collective right, and it's recognizing that fact.
Thank you. So we see that many states around the country have this built-in, this right to self-government built into the Constitution. It's usually like the first sentence in the state constitution. It's a vestment of power, that all power is derived from the people and from their will, and government is for the people and not for a special interests. Basically, it's for the many and not the few, and that we have the right to amend or abolish. And that's built in. I mean, that's the language of the Declaration of Independence, basically. And it's very interesting. What we see is that right to self-govern is interpreted differently by the state and probably by the federal people too. We see it as that our community should be able to protect itself from the harms of all kinds of terrible things that the corporations come up with to spread their pollution and their damage to our social network and to nature. They come up with all kinds of things, and basically the state legislators, what they want to do, and the judicial system, and of course the corporations, what they want to do is interpret that right to local self-government as being our right to vote. That's about what it comes down to. So you've got an electoral system that's totally corrupted because the corporations are the ones who arrange for who gets on the ballot in the first place, and then you get to vote for Mutt or Jeff. So both of them are not qualified. Both of them are like tools of the corporate state, and you get to choose one that looks more handsome or has better language or something, more greater orator, or maybe says fewer embarrassing things in public. But that's what's interpreted to be self-government, is your ability to vote for a person, and when things go wrong, then the propaganda that's offered to us is that, well, you just need to elect better officials, But that's kind of a hard thing to do. I mean, it's hard to win the game to protect yourself from harm from corporations if you only have the choices that are allowed you to have by the very people that are harming you in the first place.
And
It's kind of
that's
like
really-
it, yeah. It's like an old Wild West movie where the judge and the sheriff and the posse, they all belong to the guy with the black hat, you know, and so the place is being run like the Wild West. That's kind of where I see that we are right now. We're all living still in early colonial times with a system of law that was written in the feudal system, and you know, and this is the manifestation of a constitution that really was meant to be interpreted for the few and not for the many, as far as I can tell.
So you bring up a good point, Tom, and that is, you know, who controls the system, who controls our choices, and that's really where this amendment effort is birthed from, is the recognition by individuals, the people of the Granite State, coming to that realization that we the people don't control the system. It's our system, it's our government, and yet we don't have control over it. Even if you look at the rights, you know, enumerated within the New Hampshire Constitution, it clearly says that our state government belongs to us. But that's not the reality. The reality is that somebody else is controlling that system, and that somebody else is the corporate state. It's that marriage of the interests of industry and government officials that are looking to, you know, maybe just further their political careers. Or just to conform to the status quo. You know, well, New Hampshire's not a home rule state. We've never been a home rule state. We can't be a home rule state. You know, this sort of entrenched mindset that keeps us in this rut of never being able to come out and actually change our form of government to recognize a right that maybe isn't specifically enumerated there now. So, you know, you're right. It's who controls that system. Clearly, it's not the people right now, and that's a big part of what the amendment focuses on changing, is the structure of the system so that the people are in control at the local level. I mean, one of the things that we often say is that those affected by governing decisions should be the ones making them. Well, most people that are affected by governing decisions are the people living in the communities. And so they are the ones that should be making those governing decisions from the local up to the state, up to the federal.
So what you're saying is that, you know, the current system is failing us because the, quote, experts that we put in power are not acting on the people's best interests. They're acting for the best interests of a wealthy elite corporate culture, which has infiltrated our entire governmental system. And so what we need to do then is take that system, take control and take ownership of that system so that it doesn't belong to the corporations, it belongs to the people.
Absolutely.
The irony is that Article 38 of our New Hampshire Bill of Rights actually already says that government is not constituted for one class of person. So it's already there saying that the corporate state should not be in control. So we're taking all the wisdom from these articles and trying to put it into this amendment that clearly says that the people have the right to local self-government. They do have that right. It's in there already. And legitimate government cannot preempt those rights. But we're in a state where state preemption is making the people feel as though they have to wait for someone else to help them, because every time they speak up, Dillon's rule in New Hampshire, state preemption, or permitting agencies are stamping through these corporate projects that nullify the people's voice at every turn. When the people say, please don't poison our water, or please don't, you know, whatever the project is, please don't do that in our community, their voices are not being heard. And so really this amendment is about letting the people's voice be heard and speaking directly to our government agents in our state capital. My message would be that we're not even asking them to agree with the language of the amendment. we're asking them to do their duty as agents to us, who we have put into power. We're asking them to do their duty by giving us the chance to vote on this amendment, because it's not up to them whether or not this amendment goes through. Really, it's up to us, and we're in a position now where we're simply waiting for them to give us that chance by putting it through the House and the Senate and then allowing the people to vote on it.
Can you, you mentioned about the corporate harms that are going on in your state. Can you give us a list of, list out some of the range of what those harms are like? What are they? I know I talked to Michelle about this in depth at least once, and she was talking about these enormous industrial power projects where they want to like shave a, part the forests and and run these lines. They want to blow mountaintops off and put windmills up and gravel and water mining and water extraction projects, and what kind of things have you been exposed to there yourself in the work that you're doing?
I'm going to let Michelle talk about the big energy project.
Okay.
But personally, I can speak to feeling really compelled and energized by issues surrounding water, and how the people have used their voice to stand up to protect their water. I live really close to a town called Nottingham, New Hampshire, in which a water bottling company, USA Springs, wanted to come into the town to extract water, and studies showed that this would deplete the town's water levels by something like half, and would also draw contaminants into the people's wells. And it was through the people's assertion of their local right to self-determination that they let USA Springs know that they did not want this to happen in their community, and successfully for 10 years now have protected their watershed. And that's just one example. Michelle could speak more expertly on the big energy project that's happening further north in New Hampshire.
Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, so there have been a number of energy projects coming into the state of New Hampshire, most definitely in the last 5 years, but you can even go back 10 years, and it's pretty significant. New Hampshire is a fairly small state. It's only approximately 1.3 million people in population. And so comparatively to some of the larger states in the Midwest and western part of the country, we're not really subject to large oil and gas infrastructure. That's changing, even though there may not be natural gas deposits here in the state. We're finding that a number of these natural gas companies are looking to create a demand for their product, so that they can justify this kind of pipeline infrastructure, pressure infrastructure, compressor stations, as well as storage for LNG. So that has been an interesting development over the past 5 years in particular. And so that started out with a project called Kinder Morgan Northeast Energy Direct, which was pulled. But since it was pulled 2 years ago, they have been creating a demand for their product. In essence, we believe to justify bringing that infrastructure back. And that infrastructure had more to do with bringing that product to the coast for export than it had to do with really serving the needs of the people of the state of New Hampshire. So that would, in essence, create more expensive energy prices, and we already have like the second highest in the nation for energy prices. And this is something that the people came out very solidly against. At least 17 towns would have been affected by that particular project, and all of them were in opposition. Another project that has been ongoing now for over 7 years is called Northern Pass, and this is a Hydro-Quebec project to bring in industrial hydro energy from Canada, cross over the border, and create a 192-mile scar, 150-foot wide scar through the entire state of New Hampshire to bring energy to southern New England states. So the cry from the people of New Hampshire was that we're not going to benefit from this And what does the industry do? They say, oh, well, then we'll give New Hampshire 10% of the energy that is coming through your state. So a lot of it is you got to be careful what you ask for because you're probably going to get it. And in this case, it's a pittance. And even though people were saying that they were opposed to this project, the environmental impacts, the health impacts, the economical impacts that this would do, how it would affect the state are significant. That affects 31 towns through the state of New Hampshire. And again, collective, solid opposition to the project. But over the past 7 years, they have succeeded, the industry has succeeded in dividing that opposition so that, some of the opposition groups now say, well, we want the line buried, as opposed to when it all started, they were all solidly in agreement to oppose the project. And some of those communities that called for burying the line are actually looking at passing rights-based ordinances at the local level to prohibit this activity because they got what they asked for. And that is the developer has said, okay, we'll bury the line, but we're going to bury it right down through your main street. So they're digging up their main street, they're impacting, their local economics. Everything will shut down, potentially for many months, if not the potential for a year or longer. And we all know that any project generally is going to cost more than we anticipate. And it's going to take longer than we anticipate. Anyone who's ever done home renovations knows that. And so when you're talking a project of this size, 192 miles through an entire state, clearly what they are projecting may not be anywhere near the reality of the impact. So other things that are affecting the state in the energy department would be industrial wind projects. And again, these are industrial. So they're talking about blasting off the tops of ridge lines because in New Hampshire, we don't have wide open spaces. So the only, quote, viable wind is anything that is 2,000 feet or higher. And so they take these ridge lines, they blast them, and they embed these 500-foot tall industrial wind turbines into the granite and place them up on top of these ridge lines. What's interesting with that is not only the environmental impact, but the understanding that many of these projects, whether they are fossil fuel based, clearly does not reduce emissions, but even what some of these were considered renewable energy don't either, because the amount of emissions that goes into creating these projects, the products itself, the turbine, what it takes to develop the project itself, as well as the amount of fossil fuels and energy demand on the energy grid itself to run these projects, actually runs everything at a negative. And that's the side of information that we don't hear. You don't hear that from the developer. What you hear from the developer is that you're going to get jobs, it's going to reduce energy costs in the state, and it's going to reduce emissions, and this is clean, green, renewable, and cheap, which is far from the truth of the reality of the people living directly in that area impacted. You become an expert in the issue that is directly affecting your community. And so what the New Hampshire Community Rights Network is about is taking those kind of single issue pockets all around the state, bringing them together with that common denominator, that this isn't about just that single issue, the NIMBY, not in my backyard. It brings it into the next it might be you. There's a project in my backyard affecting me, but next it's going to be a project in your backyard affecting you. So let's come together and let's recognize that we need to be able to have a recognized right to decide what happens in our community, because we're the ones living here, we're the ones impacted and affected by that, and so we have the right to make that decision.
Thank you. So Douglas, I know that there in Barrington, New Hampshire area, you all have done some work to protect your groundwater. Is that correct?
Yes, that would have to do with the Nottingham also.
That was also Nottingham. That was that project?
They share that aquifer between the two towns. And yeah, that was a long, tedious thing that folks in that community had to go through. It's been 10 years now that they passed the ordinance. we passed an ordinance in Barnstead in 2006, seeing what was going on in Nottingham, and we had, it was 100% of the town vote, except for one in the audience that didn't agree, and he was worried about protecting the corporate privilege. And it wasn't heard at all because it took a year to educate first the selectmen to how this all works, because when you're challenging the state government, everyone gets afraid, thinking that, oh no, what are they going to do if we go up against them? And but you know, it's the educational part of what our work is with the NCRN and also the NHCRN, that's to educate the people of what their real rights are and how they can participate in the process of these decisions. And but that's about all I can really say about the water thing. It's one of the most important things, but it's really connected with the rights of nature, because whatever affects us in nature affects all of us, because we're at the top of the totem pole as far as creation. You know, we're the most intelligent and the most destructive at the same time. And it's our responsibility to level this playing field with the corporations, because they have taken powers that are really beyond the public good. Because we're the public, and we should be able to decide what is good for our communities and what the future of our communities should be. We have the vision. We don't need somebody else to come in and tell us that this is a good idea because it's going to help pay off the national debt or something like that. And this is what's coming up probably soon, because they haven't talked about the debt in a long time. But let's not get into the economics, okay? That's another whole world. But yeah, so this is really important work, and to pass this amendment would really fix a lot of things. Not everything, and it is a compromise to a certain degree, because originally, when the corporation charters were set up in New Hampshire, they were designed for the public good, and after that project was done, it was terminated. And that's the way that we looked at corporations at that time, because when we fought the Revolutionary War, it was about corporations and the powers that they were getting through the lordship of England, you know. And the people here were the ones that did all the work. And thank God to the town meeting process, because that was the beginning of all this real community rights work. And we just want to strengthen and bring it back into focus.
Yeah, so I'd just like to clarify, and maybe some of you would like to speak to this also, but the work that we've been doing in the community rights movement originated with creating local laws of our own that we write ourselves, community bills of rights, which you know, enumerate and clarify our fundamental and inalienable rights to things like clean air, clean water, you know, clean earth, freedom from chemical trespass, peaceful enjoyment of our home, you know, the right to local self-government, the right to establish prohibitions on projects that violate those rights, and the right to enforce them, you know. So that's in terms of the ordinance you were speaking of there that was initiated in Barrington and probably Nottingham also. Would you say that that's pretty accurate, pretty close to what you all passed there? Yeah.
We worked a long time on that, and everyone in those communities that were involved in it directly, we all joined together to help each other.
Right, and so then we have a lot of those bills of rights have been created around the country and are still working just fine. But every now and then, a corporation decides that it's worth it for them to tarnish their public image, take the risk of tarnishing their public image and spending some money to maybe to bribe or to do some public relations to you know, create a demand for what they're doing, what they want to do, the basic thing that the community has prohibited them from doing. They pull some strings, and then the state comes down and says that you know, we're nullifying, we're invalidating your local ordinance. And that's what Monica was referring to as state preemption. And so the amendments are there to, the state amendments are there to reinforce within the state law the right to local community self-government, and to protect our local laws from you know, preemption, basically, and other nullifications of those laws that would come down from the state or the federal government. Am I right about that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
When you have, I mean, corporations have personhood rights have been found, you know, in the federal constitution, and it's assumed that what is within a state constitution also carries over and protects the personhood rights of a corporation. So when a corporation is coming into a community with a plan, and the community says, no, we don't like that plan because that plan harms us. It harms our natural environment. It harms us as individuals. That is when you really see the true nature of corporate rights and privileges, because of those corporate personhood rights that have been found by the courts. They get to use anything, you know, within our constitutions to their benefit. And on top of that, they get additional protections and rights through the federal constitution, you know, for the takings clause, commerce clause. You know, there's just more rights that they have been able to leverage on their side than individuals and communities collectively have been able to do so on their side. And so what these state amendments do is to change that, to put the level of balance back into the appropriate hands, and those hands belong to the people, not to the corporation, and not to the state government or federal government itself. Because if the power is coming from the people and we have it within our hands and we haven't given it over to the state or to the federal government, then it is still ours to retain.
Good. So now I'd just like to put in a plug for the work that we're doing as a movement nationwide. And this state amendment campaign is part of a bigger strategy. It's a way of organizing communities around this this need for taking the right to local community self-government back into our legal domain. And what we see is that threat occurs at the state level because of Dillon's rule, the children of the state rule, the preemption rule. But also it's present in the federal constitution. That is a threat to local community self-government because of the corporate constitutional rights that are being claimed to be found in our constitution by the judiciary. There's also you know, the commerce clause, which was inserted in there to the constitution, you know, to give corporations the right to make a profit across state line by doing commerce across state lines. But also in our constitution, pretty much nature is relegated the status of property. So nature doesn't even have like an existence of its own. It exists very similar to a master-slave relationship where, you know, nature is there to be exploited for profit, but doesn't have a right to life otherwise. It doesn't have a true existence. It's not considered a legal entity. It has no standing in court. And we want to change all that at the National Community Rights Network. Our job is to organize the communities and the state organizations to amend the federal constitution or to abolish it. And so we have our own amendment, which, you know, is a draft amendment that we suggest on our website. You can find it there. at the National Community Rights Network.org. And it's very similar to what you see as the language for the New Hampshire Community Rights Amendment. Michelle, where can people go to see the wording of the New Hampshire Community Rights Amendment?
They can go to the New Hampshire Community Rights Network website, and that is www.nhcommunityrights, spelled out, COMMUNITYRIGHTS.org. And they will find that on the website. They can also go to the New Hampshire General Court website. If you Google New Hampshire General Court, there's a mechanism to search for the particular bill, and if you put in CACR 19, it'll bring you to the specific language of the amendment as introduced.
Thank you. Yeah. So everybody, how can the general public, everyone listening to this, how can they become involved in what you're doing? How can they offer support?
People can email info at newhampshirecommunityrights.org to let us know that they want to help, and we will direct them to write emails in support of the amendment to the committee that's going to be hearing the amendment. That's one way. People who are in New Hampshire could show up for the hearing of the amendment at that committee. We're trying to pack the room with supporters. So that's going to be on February 6th at 2 p.m. in room 301 of the Legislative Offices building in Concord, which is the big gray building right behind the State House. We're going to be meeting in the lobby at 1:30 p.m. So everybody can come together as a group.
Okay. Well, would anyone like to add anything else in conclusion to our meeting here today?
Getting into the subject of corporations again, I want people to understand that when we talk negatively about the corporation, we're not talking about the little guy down the street or even our own selves that we have to incorporate to protect ourselves and as far as the legal protections of a corporation and being in business. But it's the power of the giant corporations, which people come around, that the people that are that 1% or 10% that have the most money and most power in this country. And so I want the regular working man, and even the small business owners, not the huge giant multi-international corporations. They are causing a great problem. And I think that my looking at this is that if we could fix that problem, most of the Constitution is fine, okay? And but if we don't fix the Constitution, the only thing we can do is to right to revolution, in like our Article 10 in the New Hampshire Constitution. But that's not the way we're supposed to do things. We're educated people now, and we're supposed to do this in an intelligent way, and this is the way to do it. And I think that we could bring more harmony into our communities, our state, everybody in this country, to get on board with some positive things and have faith in humanity, and that we can do it.
Well, thank you, Brother Doug. And in summary, the National Community Rights Network gives our wholehearted endorsement to the 2018 New Hampshire Community Rights Amendment campaign, and would like to recognize you all for the incredible work that you're doing for yourselves, your communities, for nature, and also welcome any support anyone can give you. We're just a small number right now, but this movement is gaining great popularity, great traction. Particularly here in Colorado, there's a lot going on. And so I'm personally seeing the growth of individuals taking concerns into their own hands now. And that's the greatest threat to the corporate state, is that people actually start taking responsibility into their own hands for protecting themselves and their communities and nature. And we're the ones who have to do it. I mean, we can't expect the elected officials to do it because we already know that system is over. I mean, that's corrupt. It's probably not coming back. There's not much that can be done there. And, you know, so it's important for us to band together in our local communities and also to develop a network of state and national organizing so that we can impact the right to local community self-government everywhere. So we can establish it on the local level and then protect it from the tyranny of the state. So thank you all very much for our interview today, and we look forward to seeing how things transpire in February for this hearing.
Most
Thank you.
definitely. We really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for your interview, and I thank my colleagues for all the hard work that they've done in the state of New Hampshire.
Thanks, Doug. You've done a lot too.
Thank you. Thank you so much.